So without any further ado, I want to present to you our moderator for this afternoon. Those of you who have been with us before know that she's a powerful and wonderful speaker in her own right. She is the publisher of a newspaper in Mississippi. She dares to stand up and be counted. She's been one of our friends right from the very start. Last year she came up and gave us a very excellent talk on the Liberty Amendment, which she had to revise at the last moment because John Rousseau had stolen most of her thunder. But was it John?
Dan Smoot.
Oh, Dan Smoot. And so we really are grateful to her for taking the time to come up and help us out with our program today. And she's going to be with us all weekend, as most of our speakers are. So with that, I will turn the management of this meeting over to our very distinguished, charming, and capable Mary Dawson Kane.
Thank you, Colonel Bunko. That was certainly a gracious introduction, and I do appreciate it very much. Now, according to my time, Frank Isaac told me we should start these things on time, and as I look at my watch, I have, well, what do you have? I have about 13 minutes. You have 20 after? Who's right? It's 14 after. All right, now, I'm going to claim 14 minutes for my speaker, because he was supposed to have 40 minutes, and I'm going to give him 40 minutes. So you hear, Frank Isaac? On the counter in the exhibit room, you will find a little book called Civil Rights Myths and Communist Realities by Medford Evans, Ph.D. In the front of this book, you will find a complete biographical sketch of this very wonderful person whom it is my privilege to introduce. But I am not going to take time to give you all of this because time is running out on us and we want to stick to schedule as much as possible. He is a native of Texas, and I am very proud of the fact that he is married to a Mississippi girl, a fellow Pike Countian. I live in Summit, Mississippi, and Dorothy lived in Macomb, Mississippi. Josephine, I have Dorothy. Dorothy is Josephine's sister. Well, they live in Macomb, and he married a Macomb girl. Now, I understand that when he was in Chicago and made this masterful address, that even the left-wing press referred to him as the only real intellectual among all those present. The rest of the people present were just, well, so-and-so. But he was really a person who could think on his feet. Now, Dr. Evans got his Ph.D. at Yale. He taught English and history in Southern colleges. And then he went to Oak Ridge, Tennessee during World War II as training instructor, a position from which he advanced in a few years to become AEC Chief of Training in Washington. Well, I won't go into all the bureaucracy that he was involved in, but he soon had enough of it, and he left it. Now, he has edited Facts Forum News, contributed to the Free Man, Human Events, National Review, American Opinion, and The Citizen. And he is a consultant to the Citizens Councils of America. He is a former coordinator for the John Birch Society, but I'm glad to tell you that he gave it up because he is presently on the permanent staff of the Citizens Councils of America, in which capacity he is doing a marvelous job. And with no further ado, I will introduce to you my good friend and fellow Mississippian, Dr. Medford Evans.
Thank you so much, Mary, for that more than gracious introduction. It is a special privilege to be on the platform with such a charming Southern lady as Mary Dawson Kane, and to be here under the auspices of such distinguished people as Mrs. McKinney. And particularly I am proud to follow Colonel Bunker after his masterfully concise expression of Americanism as the true moderation between the genuine extremes of anarchy and tyranny. My topic today is where are we heading, that the question, where are we heading, should be asked in Boston on or near the 4th of July, leaves little doubt that the we means we, the people of the United States. No other city, not even Philadelphia, equals Boston as the historic hub of Americanism. Among the states, Virginia and Massachusetts were leaders of the independence movement, but in Virginia there was no city to match Boston. As a visitor to this Mecca of American independence, I will not be so presumptuous as to specify any of the great acts of self-reliant patriotism which have established the fame of Boston, lest I seem through negligence or ignorance to be deficient in appreciation of other exploits of equal luster. Since I could never name them all, I will not risk the charge of invidiousness by naming any. I am simply awestruck to be in Boston. And yet I hope you will permit me to exclude from this mute reverence the contemporary scene in the Boston area. On the one hand, I must articulate my admiration for the work of the John Birch Society, its periodical organ, American Opinion, and its founder, Robert Welch. On the other hand, I think we must all face the fact that we are within a stone's throw of Walt Rostow's MIT and McGeorge Bundy's Harvard. And what patriot would dare miss such an opportunity? History may yet record our era as the great interregnum between George III and Martin I. And may note that as Bostonians contributed much to liberty from the former king, they are, to be more precise, Cantabrigians, also contributed mightily to liberation under the latter king. What we seem to be heading for today is the abolition of the United States, beginning with Mississippi. The major commitment of the world communist movement at this time is, in the words of Ahmed Ben Bella, quote, the liquidation of colonialism in its classical or veiled form, unquote. Now that objective has not changed simply because Ben Bella himself may have been liquidated in the process. The most active revolutionaries in the United States today view the state of Mississippi, quote, as microcosm of the long world history of colonialism and the exploitation of colored peoples, close quote. Those words are by Stanley Kaufman, but the view is that of the militant Negro movement. Martin Luther King's companion, Bayard Rustin, who has made a name for himself from Washington to Pasadena, had a very perceptive article in last February's issue of Commentary, an influential magazine published by the American Jewish Committee. Entitled From Protest to Politics, The Future of the Civil Rights Movement, this article should serve as a warning to all who are interested in the preservation of the United States. So far from wishing to quote Rustin out of context, I urge on the contrary that his entire essay be read. Meanwhile, the gist of it is not unfairly represented by the following, quote, I believe the Negro struggle for equality in America is essentially revolutionary. While most Negroes in their hearts unquestionably seek only to enjoy the fruits of American society as it now exists, their quest cannot objectively be satisfied within the framework of existing political and economic relations. If you'll permit me to repeat that, these are the words of Bayard Rustin. While most Negroes in their hearts unquestionably seek only to enjoy the fruits of American society as it now exists, their quest cannot objectively be satisfied within the framework of existing political and economic relations. Continuing then from Bayard Rustin, the Negro struggle has hardly run its course, and it will not stop moving until it has been utterly defeated or won substantial equality. One could speculate on political implications, whether, for example, they do not indicate the obsolescence of state government and the superiority of regional structures as viable units of planning. How are these radical objectives to be achieved? The answer is simple, deceptively so, through political power. Close quote from Bayard Rustin. The revolutionary use of political power to end state government and otherwise alter the framework of existing political and economic relations goes far beyond what most congressmen presumably had in mind when they voted for the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It is, however, precisely what Bayard Rustin has in mind, and there is little reason to doubt that it is what Rustin's friend Martin Luther King has in mind. What shall we say of Martin Luther King's friend Lyndon B. Johnson? The concept of the revolutionary struggle is one in which all the historic features of the United States of America are to be obliterated. Its racial composition, its form of government, its economic system, its religion, its culture, even its ideals of romance. Under the influence of Rustin, of author James Baldwin, and other White House favorites, America's sweetheart is no longer to be a non-sexy pretty blonde like Mary Pickford or a sexy pretty blonde like Marilyn Monroe, but a homosexual middle-aged man, preferably, though not necessarily, mulatto. One reason why Mississippi is especially hated by revolutionaries is that in Mississippi, as a rule, the sexes as well as the races are clearly distinguished. Sex consciousness as well as race consciousness tends to mitigate class consciousness, and that from the revolutionary point of view would never do. Rustin does not want even the Negro's own race consciousness to interfere with the class struggle. Quote, "At issue, after all," he says, "is not civil rights, strictly speaking, but social and economic conditions. Last summer's riots were not race riots. They were outbursts of class aggression in a society where class and color definitions are converging disastrously." How can the perhaps misnamed civil rights movement deal with this problem? Asked Bayard Rustin. Now that surely suggests that Rustin is a revolutionary first and a Negro second. Judging by his pictures, one might fleetingly suspect him of not being a Negro at all, but an Arab. He looks like an Arab. Thank you. As a Marxist, Rustin could hardly regard racial agitation as anything other than a means to an end. The whole tenor of his article indicates that he does so regard it. He is, of course, in the magazine commentary, appealing primarily to Jews. Oddly enough, he lets slip, or so it would seem, one flash of anti-Jewish feeling. From the point of view of motivation, he writes, and I'm quoting now, "Some of the healthiest Negro youngsters I know are juvenile delinquents, vigorously pursuing the American dream of material acquisition and status, yet finding the conventional means of attaining it blocked off. They do not yield to defeatism, but resort to illegal and often ingenious methods." Now, can you think of a better means of justifying mugging and robbery and so on than that? Vigorously pursuing the American dream of material acquisition and status, yet finding the conventional means of attaining it blocked off, they do not yield to defeatism, but resort to illegal and often ingenious methods. They are not alien to American culture. They are, in Gunnar Myrdal's phrase, exaggerated Americans. To want a Cadillac is not un-American. Now listen to this. To push a cart in the garment center is un-American. Close quote. So Bayard Rustin says that a Harlem Simba is just an exaggerated American, while an industrious Jewish boy working his heart out in Midtown Manhattan is un-American. Maybe Rustin isn't Arab. Philosophically, Rustin removes all doubt that he is a Marxist. Speaking of attitudes which whites and Negroes may have towards each other, he denies that race itself is important. It is institutions, he says, social, political, and economic institutions, which are the ultimate molders of collective sentiments. Let these institutions be reconstructed today, and let the ineluctable gradualism of history govern the formation of a new psychology, close quote. That is the essential revolutionary doctrine of Rousseau and of Marx. And this is the man whom commentary identifies as follows, quote, Bayard Rustin, who organized the March on Washington and has been a close associate of Martin Luther King, is widely recognized as the leading tactician of the civil rights movement, close quote. Incidentally, of all the things symbolized by the March on Washington, perhaps none is more basic than the implicit expression of hostility toward the, however corrupted, capital of the United States. The extent and depth of this hostility are hard to gauge, but a suggestion may be found in another current periodical with which Bayard Rustin is connected. This is Liberation, an independent monthly, which is one of the battery of revolutionary publications to be found in increasing numbers along the margin of the ocean of pornography in today's typical metropolitan newsstand. Other such periodicals are Dissent, a quarterly of socialist opinion published in New York, The Correspondent, published quarterly at Emerson Hall 324, Harvard University, and Motive, a publication of the General Board of Education of the Methodist Church. The financial and organizational power back of these spark plugs for revolution is impressive in the extreme. Liberation, the one I'm centering on now, has an editorial board of 4, of whom Bayard Rustin is one, and A.J. Musty, the veteran peace fighter, another. Musty has an article in February 65 issue in which he quotes at length and with explicit sympathy, if not complete endorsement, one Leroy Jones, a young Negro playwright, poet, and critic. Now, Jones says this in part, quote, my ideas revolve around the rotting and destruction of America. So I can't really expect anyone who is part of that to accept my ideas. But 90% of the world knows they are true. That's what counts. They know the West is done. America is the West because it owns the West. America is the source of Western culture, a culture whose time has come and which is rotting at the roots. Close quote from Leroy Jones. By the way, Jones has been criticized in the left-wing periodical Dissent on the grounds that he is a fake. That is, they're unhappy because he won't really wreck and kill the way he says he will. Now, unless you and I assume that Jones and other leaders of the so-called Negro Revolution, unless we assume that Jones is a fool, an assumption that we would be reckless to make, we must assume that he knows that America is not at all the source of Western culture except in 2 areas. Most of our culture, our religion, our language, our arts, our science, came and largely still comes from the old world. But we have made universally significant innovations in 2 areas. One, the practical application of technological principles to mass production, and 2, the establishment of government under a written constitution. Now, if Leroy Jones and A.J. Musty and Bayard Rustin are hostile toward America, their hostility must be logically directed, and the evidence is that in fact it is so directed, against constitutional government, the constitutional government of the United States, and against the American economic system. Now, besides these two areas in which the United States has set the example for the rest of the civilized world, there is one other institution which is characteristically American, which has never been absent from American life, and without which life in this country would not be recognizable as being American in any historic sense of the term, and that is the institution of racial segregation, either established by law, as until recently in the South, or even more rigidly established by custom, as it has always been in the North and has come to be recently in the South. Now, in this matter of racial segregation, unlike mass production and constitutionalism, the rest of the world has not followed our example. Latin America, which began to be developed by white men sooner than Anglo-America, indulged in race mixing from the start. No other parts of the world except South Africa have had similar racial components in their population, except then to the extent that apartheid parallels it. Segregation is a unique and an essential feature of historic America. To destroy it is to destroy America. So much the better, say Leroy Jones and others. The Statue of Liberty, according to a member of the Black Liberation Front who was arrested in February and convicted last month, is, quote, a damned old bitch, close quote. He and his associates, the Associated Press reported, were described as pro-Castro and pro-Chinese racial fanatics. You see why the charge of hate monger, which is often leveled at champions of the white race, is leveled by those who know that if such hate did exist, it would only be a natural response. Now, these new abolitionists not only hate the South, as did the original abolitionists. Let me interject, by the way, the abolition movement is often associated with Boston. I want to remind you that in the year 1835, there was a demonstration against the abolitionists in Boston, in which the mayor of Boston took part. So the abolitionists were a very minor group in this city, although a very powerful and influential group. The new abolitionists not only hate the South, as did the old, but they hate the whole United States. The chant of freedom now is not a demand for the abolition of slavery, which was abolished by the 13th Amendment, but a demand for political freedom from the United States, a freedom which they seek actually not by way of secession from the United States, but destruction of the United States. The new abolitionists are sufficiently realistic to recognize that the U.S. is a federal nation composed of states that became and have remained united, but which are still states and have essential aspects of sovereignty. 13 of these created the federal government and adopted a constitution providing that any future states should enjoy the same status as the original 13. Thus, each of the present 50 is logically anterior to the federal government. If any one of them should be destroyed by or through the federal government, the constitutional basis of all would have been demolished, and the fall of each could be expected in due course. A conspiratorial enemy of the United States, such as the Communist Party, could find no surer way to erase America from history than to begin with an assault on any one state, and having liquidated its proper social and political institutions, to proceed with suitably modified attacks on the other states. As the states vanish to make way for administrative districts, the union of the states would automatically vanish to become a region of the World Soviet Republic, or whatever the political monolith of the, we hope, imaginary future may be called. That such a program has objectively begun cannot seriously be questioned, and it is even clearer that in any such program the first state to go is supposed to be Mississippi. The indictment of a Mississippi sheriff and the challenge to the Mississippi congressional delegation are the features of the assault on Mississippi most conspicuous in the news during recent months. Something which seems not to have been too widely noticed, but certainly true, is that if the so-called Freedom Democratic Party should succeed in unseating the duly elected congressman from Mississippi, on the ground that the state has deprived Negroes generally of a right to vote, then it would follow logically that the governor, the legislature, and all other officials of the state have also been illegally elected, for they have certainly been elected by the same electorate. And it follows further that all the former Confederate states except Tennessee are illegal, for they all have the same historic foundation. And that includes, besides Mississippi, Virginia, North and South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Louisiana, Arkansas, and, dare we say so, LBJ's own Texas. It can hardly be doubted that such a logical inference would be relentlessly pursued by the new abolitionists. Now, as with previous revolutionaries, these enemies of the United States in general, and of, at the present time, Mississippi in particular, have spelled out their aims and the outline of their strategy for all who will read. The periodical literature on the subject is voluminous. A particularly revealing example appeared last summer in the New Republic in two articles of July 25 and August 22 by one Christopher Jenks. Having said that the assault on Mississippi was led by one Robert Moses, Jenks continues, soon after entering the state, the leaders of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee began to realize that ending white supremacy in Mississippi would ultimately require the use of force. Proceeding to admit, or rather to show, that a black insurrection would be hopeless, he then adds, yet if Mississippi Negroes cannot hope to employ force successfully themselves, they can hope to play their cards cleverly enough so that the federal government will do their job for them. One may wonder how white supremacy is going to be ended when one set of white men, federal, displace another set, state, that is, when Lyndon Johnson takes over from Paul Johnson. But allowing for this built-in self-contradiction, the strategy of the new abolitionists does appear to be rather clever. New Republic writer Jenks tells us that the civil rights workers spend as much time, energy, and blood trying to push the Washington administration as trying to push white Mississippi. And Jenks also explains the motivation back of this, for he says, and this is the theme that occurs over and over as you study the radical left-wing literature. The Civil Rights Act does not go to the heart of the matter. Now, that's not my statement, that's the left-wing statement. And we noted before that Bayard Rustin said that the civil rights movement is possibly misnamed. Nor, says Jenks, does desegregation go to the heart of the matter. His explanation of what is the deeper purpose, I think, is worth quoting at some length. Quote, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee represents a new generation of Negroes. They are rebellious and radical, echoing James Baldwin. Now, let me pause in the midst of this quote to quote James Baldwin, who says in his book, The Fire Next Time, and he says with evident exultation that the Negro may not be in a position to win all that he thinks he wants, but Baldwin says gloatingly, he is in a position to, quote, ring down the curtain on the American dream. And of course, you know, that whole title of that book, The Fire Next Time, is a threat to destroy America. And this book has become a bestseller with the people who are going to be destroyed. Resuming the quote from the analytical author Christopher Jenks in the New Republic, he says, such talk reflects the anti-white feeling of many Negroes. But even more important is bitter hostility to the middle class, black or white. Brother Ward will bear me out in this. And a Negro woman, Natalie Ayler, that I met just before this, who lives in Roxbury, will bear me out in that. What these young radicals are looking for is not a chance to make it in white America, but a chance to remake America along more egalitarian and proletarian lines. The word proletarian is, of course, highly significant. This is an admission that this is a communist revolution. They have chosen to begin in Mississippi for many reasons, all that they dislike in America is written bold in Mississippi, with ambiguities and shading eliminated. Mississippi dramatizes the problem of the American Negro than any other place, better than any other place, north or south. At the same time, the more ideological Negro workers are fascinated by Mississippi because to their minds it comes closer to being a pre-revolutionary situation than any other in America. Close quote. At issue, then, are the source and application of governmental power in the state of Mississippi and therefore throughout the United States. Let us briefly recap some basic principles. Government is force applied to persons, a necessary evil. A revolution consists precisely of transferring control of that force from one set of hands to another. No revolution is more complete than one which displaces those officers, whatever their nominal rank, who in fact can make arrests. And no revolution is complete which does not acquire a monopoly of power to make arrests. That there is no such monopoly in the United States is the operational reason why this is not a totalitarian country. If you can make an arrest, you are the law. The citizen's arrest is the ultimate expression of the dispersal of power. At the other extreme, if you and you alone can arrest anybody for anything, then you have total power. No one has total power in this country, thank God, but there are people who are trying to get it. The most obvious impediment in the way of these revolutionaries is the existing control of most of our governmental force by local peace officers. Now, the chief executive of the United States theoretically could belong to the revolution himself, or he might come to be. But there are 3,072 counties in this country, and typically the chief executive, the sheriff, is elected by the people of the county. He doesn't always position to the governor of the state, much less to the President of the United States. In many urban areas, the county has come to be politically innocuous, but for most of the land area of the United States, it is sheriffs who are in charge. 3,000 independent sources of authority. That is enough to give any good totalitarian the heebie-jeebies. Something, they feel, has to be done about that, and in Neshoba County, Mississippi, and Dallas County, Alabama, Katzenbach and Martin Luther King are trying to do what they can. Psychological mobilization in the World War against Mississippi is very far advanced. The New York Times, which put the United States into 2 world wars and which got Castro his job in Havana, is untiring in its animadversions on Mississippi. Typical of its attitude is an article in the magazine for November the 8th last year entitled, quote, "Communique from the Mississippi Front," in which the rhetoric is pervasively that of a wartime report from a battlefield, in which the Negro organizations represent our troops, the local Negroes are actual or potential Maquis, supporting a laudable resistance movement, and the enemy is the white population of Mississippi. The Washington Post, supporting the Freedom Democratic Party's effort to deny Mississippi its representation in Congress, said editorially recently, quote, "It is high time for Mississippi to learn that the country is not altogether indifferent to its contempt for the Constitution," close quote. They beg the question as to whether Mississippi is in fact contemptuous of the Constitution. The Post simply wants action and no paralyzing two sides to the question stuff. Now, as a rule, every war, including every ideological war, must be translated into a struggle over territory. In this country, Mississippi in particular, and the South in general, have been chosen. It is almost as obvious as the case of South Africa, which the liberal establishment is daily preparing for final immolation. But the forces in this struggle are not to be calculated simply by measuring the column inches of publicity on either side, or by the rhetorical vehemence or skill of those who have access to the linotype and the microphone. There are many people around the world who are incapable today of stating that they are for the continuation of the white race, but who nevertheless feel that. In England, for example, the British can no longer say in Kipling's language that they believe in the white man's burden. They cannot support Englishmen in Kenya, the Rhodesias, or South Africa, much less in Mississippi. But what they can do is feel inward admiration for those in such colonial outposts, and at home they can vote against Patrick Gordon Walker, which they did. And we find in Mississippi that while there is nothing but condemnation from the press, the pulpit, and the academy north of the Mason and Dixon line, and mostly south of it as well, that our strongest support actually comes from the people in the great cities of the north. As the World War against Mississippi becomes more distinctly defined, the latent support throughout the world will start to surface. It is a nice question whether the predictable reaction will equal or surpass the intended action. What will you do about Mississippi? Every American must sooner or later answer that question. For either you will deliberately act or speak in defense of this first of the United States to be so massively assaulted, or else through inertia, your weight will be added to the psychological and hence political force of the new abolitionists. In too many areas of influence in America today, it goes without saying that Mississippi is wrong. If you think that she is right, or has any right, then you had better say so now. Soon it may not only be too late to save Mississippi, it may be too late for you to speak your mind about anything. Thank you.